today, which is basically the idea that all of existence has come about by natural, undirected means. So we're going to look at that tonight. We're going to challenge that tonight on the basis of science. And we're also going to be looking at the Genesis record tonight, its account, and look at how it came about, or when it came about, and was it like other accounts during its time period. So, as we look at this, I'm going to make this kind of statement. The original and unique creation record you're only going to find in Genesis 1 and 2. Almost every culture in the world has some sort of creation story. Almost every culture in the world has some sort of beginning of the universe, or at least of the land in which they live, okay? Those myths, that type of mythology has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. That is not unusual, okay? But what you do find unusual is just how Genesis begins. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. It's a very clear beginning to the universe. And so Genesis 1 states that it came about by God, that it was created from nothing, and that word created there we'll look at in just a moment and define that. And it was created according to God's will and by His word. And so the first two chapters of Genesis should be analyzed like any other biblical text. What I'm not saying tonight, and what I don't want you to get incorrect at all tonight, is the idea that Genesis 1 and 2 should be read as a science abstract. It should not. It should not be read like a science textbook. It is not meant for that. It should be read just as any other biblical text should be read. Number one, what was the purpose for the writing? Number two, who was the audience? Number three, what's the significance of the original language and what it has to do with that audience? And number four, what's the style of writing? I will make the point right now that in Psalms 104, where it says the earth cannot be moved, that was a poetic way of saying that the earth is something you can count upon. It is not a scientific statement that the earth doesn't move. Everything in this universe we know moves. And so just the style of writing in Psalms 104 should have indicated something to people about what the writer was trying to say. So no biblical passage should ever be read as a science textbook. That said, now listen carefully. And this is the thing that we looked at carefully last year when we looked at the Truth Project. Truth never contradicts truth. So if there's some sort of apparent or obvious or non-obvious contradiction between science and the Bible, then the following three things are true. Either number one, the science is incorrect. That we've found before. I will give you an example of that. Many, many years, there were people who said, there are no Hittites. The Bible is wrong about the entire Hittite nation and everything about it. David talks about having Uriah a Hittite, and there's not even the Hittites. We can't find them. Well, they just hadn't found them. They were looking in the Mesopotamia area. When they looked in Turkey, they found all of the remains. And now, I know, as a sixth grade teacher, I teach about Hittite history and how they affected the Babylonians, etc. It's common knowledge. So in that case, the statement was wrong. It wasn't really science that was wrong, but the statement that the Bible was wrong was incorrect, and science finally did corroborate what the Bible stated about that. Secondly, the understanding of the biblical passage could be incorrect. We've seen that many times. And I do believe that my understanding of Genesis, and I'm going to make this statement right now. Some of you might be looking at me going, what did you just say? But I will make this statement right now. My understanding of Genesis has been colored by my understanding of what I believe science is saying today. Okay? And I don't think that's a bad thing. All right? I think that sometimes we can absolutely manipulate the scriptures to mean something scientific when it never was intended to mean that, and I'm not saying that at all. I am just saying that my understanding of some parts of Genesis has been colored by my understanding of what I believe is almost incontrovertible when it comes to science today. Did I use a word you might not have understood? Incontrovertible, not being able to be disputed, okay? And finally, both are incorrect. Sometimes that can happen as well. Well, let's go on here. Science and the Bible bear the same testimony about the early condition of the earth, that it was formless and void. Everybody in science talks about the earth's beginning as being something that was really quite dark and unusual and uninhabitable, etc. And that's exactly what the Bible says about this. In every way, however, the Genesis account is different from mythological creation stories of early civilizations. And this is where it has such a striking difference. I think sometimes with these things in our hands, in which we can get information so quickly and so verifiably, any time that we want it, that we have just not understood that our age is so very different when it comes to information. The vast majority of people during Moses' time were illiterate. They had absolutely no way of reading or writing. Who in the Israelite nation was to read to them and had to have that ability? What was the tribe? The Levites. They were specifically there in order to serve the people as the teachers and the shepherds of the people. And they were the ones that knew how to read and write. They were the scribes of the day. Okay? So you have to understand that during that time period, you have this very different creation myths coming about. Now, Moses, who's the writer of Genesis, how was he schooled? Where was he brought up? I never even thought of that for a while. He's brought up as one of the princes of Egypt. You think he's going to be getting the best education that Egypt has to offer for the day? Let me tell you about their creation myths. First of all, they've got 3 of them. Guess why? Because they changed capitals. And each time politically, they had to come up with a different myth about the creation. So first, there was the Heliopolis creation myth, and then there was the Memphis myth, and then it got changed to a Thebes myth, and in every time there was a different god who created the earth and who created the universe. That's what Moses is going to be learning about. He's going to be learning about the one in Thebes at that time. That was the capital when he was there in the New Kingdom period. And so it is just there's all sorts of politicized information in every one of their creation myths. Take the Babylonian ones over on the other side of the Fertile Crescent, and you've got Mesopotamia over there, and those are just like the Greek mythology. You've got a father god and a mother god having baby gods, and they grow up and they have the parental disobedience, and somebody kills somebody else. There's intrigue, there's murder, there's jealousy, there's all sorts of horrific things that are going on continually. Gods against gods, and these are the gods that have created Mesopotamia. And Marduk is the great god of the Babylonians. You don't have anything like this in Genesis. In comparison to all other creation myths, the historical accuracy of this and the scientific plausibility of Genesis is absolutely striking. Moses, its author, had most likely had a world-class education in Egypt. in science and in philosophy, and yet his writing of Genesis creation account has absolutely nothing to do with what the Egyptians taught him. In the beginning, God, a single, only God, created out of nothing the entire universe. And then he spoke things into existence. And there was no intrigue, and there was no fighting, because there are no other gods. He is God alone. Out of that period of time comes this record. That's why it is so unique. Now, let's look at some other things that we want to say about Genesis 1 and 2 as well, because Genesis 1 and 2 is in stark contrast to the whole idea of naturalism. And we've taken a look at naturalism, but we're going to look at it very carefully tonight. That's one of the things that I think we really need to do. I want to just quote something from Horton and Roberts in Understanding Creation. They make this statement about it. Only in the Genesis creation account do we find one true God who brought all things into existence in an orderly and virtuous manner, and who stands unopposed in power and majesty. That's a beautiful statement. I love the virtue there. God brought about the whole universe in a virtuous way, and you will not find any other kind of creation myth that is like that. They all have intrigue and murder and jealousy and strife and everything else. And finally, one God comes out on top. God is unopposed in this creation account. So let's take a look now. Open up your Bibles to Genesis 1, and let's take a look at Genesis 1 and 2. And let's take a look at some of this original language here that we find. And those of you who come to the Canyon Church, you already know this first one if you've been listening to Aaron long enough. In the beginning, God created. The word created that is used in Genesis 1 and 2 is very consistent. It only uses the word created when the word bara in the original language was used. And as far as any Hebrew scholar will say, this word means to create out of nothing. It is given to God and God alone. It is never, ever, ever stated that man could create something, even though we use those words today, right? I created an art piece. I created a new design for an automobile. Okay, that word in the Hebrew language would never be used with a person in mind, only was given to God. But there are other words here. Asa, to make out of existing materials or to do something. That one actually is used of human beings, okay? Another one, yatsar, to form or to fashion something, as in almost an artistic way, using materials, existing materials again. Another word, and this is not haya, this is haya, I think is how you say it, and it just means let there be. Did you notice this in the beginning? Verse 3, then God said, let there be light. My understanding of that is that God had already created everything that was going to be used for light. And then he allows the molecular structure to actually coalesce in such a way to give light. Now, was light there before the sun? That is a very interesting question. And a lot of times people look at that and go, wait, let there be light there, but then on day 4, over here, verse 14, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs for the seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. Okay. So the question is, could light have existed somehow before? I don't know. That's a question that I don't know how to answer. What's very interesting is that scientists say that there is light apart from sun and the sun's energy and artificial light that we make. It's microwavable light, and they all state that it happened at the beginning of the universe. That in the first explosion of the universe, that there was microwavable light in existence all over the universe. Is that coinciding with the Genesis language? Again, I don't know, okay? Some have stated that God actually did make the sun and the moon on this, in verse 3 right there, let there be light, but it was not visible on the earth for a while because the earth was formless and void for that time period, and when things began to then clear up on the earth, the two were visible. Let there be, in other words, let it be seen, let it come out, let it fall out at that time. And then this last one is yom, and this means a day. And this can mean a 24-hour period, it can mean an age, it can mean a period of time, and many, many more. And you'll find the word day listed in all of those, but what is very interesting about this is that the word day is used in maybe two different ways there. So you would have this reading of verse 5 probably in your translations. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning one day. Okay, now that's a pretty good translation of the original, but the original says this: evening, morning, one day. That's all it says. Evening, morning, two, and it's day two is what it says. So the ordinal comes in order, the ordinal is the number there, comes in order to express that day. Look at Genesis 2:4 and tell me how the word day is used there. Is Genesis 2:4 used as a 24-hour period? Somebody read that. I know this is not going to come well through the thing, so maybe I ought to read it. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord made the heaven and the earth. Is that a 24-hour period? I think not. Okay, because he's talking about the entire time period when he created everything. That was the account there. This is the account, Moses is saying. So here is the question that we have before us. What is Moses trying to get across? Is he trying to get across all of this science to these people? No, I don't think so. That is not his purpose. What he's trying to do is he's trying to help these people understand where they have come from and where they are going and their purpose in life. And I believe that same purpose is what we have today. So in the purpose for the writing, it's to reveal to the descendants of Israel that everything they saw was created and formed. Some created out of nothing, apparently, and then later fashioned and formed by God, who is an invisible God, in contrast to the gods that they learned about in Egypt and Mesopotamia and in those mythologies, and that creation was good in every way, and that all men are created in the image of this one invisible God. And what's so interesting about that word bara is that when you go to verse 27, he says that he created man that way, in the image of God. He also says he formed man out of the dust of the earth. My understanding of that, again, is the idea that what God created within us out of nothing is his image, is the Spirit. But what he used for this morphology here, in other words, this body that we live in, was formed out of what he had already created out of nothing. He fashioned woman in exactly that way. And yet, what does he say about it? Look at what he says in verse 27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So the part of woman that was fashioned or formed, probably the yatsar right there, was out of Adam's rib, in other words, out of already existing materials, so to speak, and the part that he creates from out of nothing is his image that he stamps upon us, which we have a spirit inside of us, which is like God. Because this on the outside does not look like God. We know that that's not the case. Okay, second, who's the audience? Well, these are people who have been immersed in Egyptian mythology. I'm on page 9 now. Whose ancestors have been immersed in Babylonian mythology regarding the creation of the earth. And these are people who have been called to believe in one God in contrast to all polytheistic cultures of their day, and they're people who have recently witnessed their salvation from Egyptian slavery by a powerful hand of an invisible God, and they need to know who he is. This is the audience there. And I'm gonna say something to you about this. If you were a 5-year-old and you asked your parents, Mom, Dad, how did I come out? How did I come about? What was it like when you guys got together? Okay, what would you probably say? Do you think that you would go into all of the sexual part of scientific part of how the sperm met the egg and all of this kind of thing happened? A kid is going to be looking at you going, what are you talking about at 5 years old? Okay. You're probably going to say it something like this. Well, there was a time, or there was a day, you might say, that Mommy and Daddy met. And then there was a day that Mommy and Daddy fell in love. And there was a day in which you were born. And we held you for the first time. And there was a day that we did this, and this is the story of how you've come about. And so when I look at the significance of the original language, I think it is very significant, but I don't think it's scientific in the case. However, that being said, I don't think it violates any part of what we know scientifically. The style of the writing, by the way, we just read this in Obadiah today, Obadiah 8. In the day that I did this to the, it hadn't even been done yet, but God was talking about the day when he was going to bring Edom down. It's not a 24-hour period there either, but it's the same word, yom. It indicates that. Style of writing, stated in the story or narrative form with poetic nuances here and there. And what I mean by, I'm not saying it's poetry. I think it is a narrative. I think it's a story. I think it's a story like someone saying, here's how you came about. And their understanding would be, God is the maker, creator of everything I see. He did it in a number of time periods, and they correspond to our week and what we are going to be doing. He rested on the seventh day, which, by the way, is not a 24-hour period. I am convinced of that, because the seventh day is still going on. God is still resting from his creation, or his creative mode there. So I do not believe that that day is a 24-hour period either. However, whether you believe that or not, it's just one of those ways of saying it has this repetition in there. Evening, morning, day 1. Evening, morning, day 2. Evening, morning, day 3. Okay? And it's completely consistent with a story-like way of telling people about something that there's no way in my life I would ever be able to understand. How does God speak something into existence? I don't understand that scientifically, and no one can. And so it was stated in such a way that we would have that kind of understanding. All right. Again, what was the purpose of Genesis 1 and 2? That God created, made, fashioned, and formed everything you see. He is the originator of life. Now, I want you to look at this next part.
There are really two big questions in biology. How do you get new living forms with new structures like wings and eyes from life that already exists? And secondly, how did life originate on Earth in the first place? Now, of course, we know that Darwin spent most of his life formulating an answer to the first of these two questions.
Charles Darwin compared the history of life on Earth to a great branching tree. The base of the tree represented the very first living cell, and the branches were new and more complex life forms that had evolved over time from the first primitive organism.
Darwin was trying to explain how the branches on the tree of life originated. He was trying to show how natural selection could have modified existing organisms to produce the great diversity of plant and animal life that fills the earth today. But when it came to the base of the tree, which represented the origin of the first life, the first living cell, Darwin had very little to say. In fact, in The Origin of Species, he didn't even address the question of how life might have originated from non-living matter.
The only glimpses we have of Darwin's opinions on the subject appear in a letter he wrote to a colleague named Joseph Hooker.
Regarding the first production of a living organism, if, and oh what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, light, heat and electricity present, that a protein compound was chemically formed, ready to undergo still more complex changes, at the present such matter would be instantly devoured. But this may not have been the case before living creatures were formed.
During the final years of his life, Darwin did little to develop his idea that a primitive cell might have emerged from simple chemicals in the primordial waters of the early Earth. But later in the 1920s and 30s, a Russian scientist named Alexander Oparin formulated a detailed theory about how this could have happened. It was called chemical evolution.
Oparin thought that he could explain the origin of the first life using Darwinian principles. He envisioned simple chemicals combining and recombining to form larger molecules, and then these larger molecules organizing themselves with the help of chance variations and natural selection into the first primitive living cell.
Over the next 3 decades, many scientists worked to develop and refine these ideas as they pondered the questions both Oparin and Darwin had raised. How could life have evolved from simple chemicals?
Since the 1950s, many scientists have felt that they could simulate chemical evolution, the kind that might have happened on the early Earth. And what they're trying to do is to take simple chemicals and put them together to form amino acids.
These amino acids are actually chemical compounds. 20 different types of amino acids are common in living organisms. They comprise about half the dry weight of every cell. Amino acids are the building blocks of larger molecules called proteins. And proteins are the primary components of every cell that has ever existed on the Earth.
Proteins have a wide range of function in the cell, everything from structural requirements in terms of scaffolding of the cell, the cytoskeleton, to enzymes.
Proteins do all the day-to-day jobs inside of the cell, making energy, moving things around, cleaning up the cell. And the earliest cells had to have those same proteins because they needed those same jobs done. So the proteins in the earliest cell and the proteins today were of the same type of complexity.
Scientists realized that the complex structure of protein molecules are keys to understanding how life on Earth began.
By the 1960s, scientists had determined that even simple cells are made of thousands of different types of proteins. And the function of these molecules derives from their highly complex three-dimensional shapes. The irregular shapes of some proteins allow them to catalyze or trigger chemical reactions because of the hand and glove fit that they have with other molecules in the cell. While other protein molecules form interlocking structural components.
The individual parts of a bacterial motor, like this ring structure, are each made of either a single protein molecule or an assembly of proteins fitted together into a specific shape. These proteins consist of one or more chains containing hundreds or thousands of individual amino acids. Biologists have compared the 20 different amino acids used to build protein chains to the 26 letters of the English alphabet.
Alphabetic letters can be arranged in a huge number of possible combinations, and it's the sequential arrangement of the letters that determines whether you have meaningful words and sentences. If the letters are arranged correctly, you'll get meaningful text. But if they're not arranged correctly, you'll get gibberish. And the same principle applies for amino acids and proteins.
There are at least 30,000 distinct types of proteins, each made of a different combination of the same 20 amino acids. They are arranged, like letters, to form chains, often hundreds of units long. If the amino acids are sequenced correctly, then the chain will fold into a functioning protein.
Proteins are arranged in such a way that their amino acids collapse on one another and form an architecture that's pre-programmed by the hundreds of amino acids along the protein chain. So the order of those amino acids inside of a protein is essential to getting the right shape.
This arrangement is critical, for if the amino acids are incorrectly sequenced, a useless chain forms, and instead of folding into a protein, it will be destroyed in the cell. As science reveals the intricate construction of proteins, origin of life researchers are confronted with a difficult question. Could amino acids floating in a primordial ocean have arranged themselves into protein molecules through purely random interactions?
Obviously, it is very difficult to imagine how in the primordial oceans the amino acids could organize themselves one after another into the right sequence to form even the simplest protein. And a good way to think about this is to think about the English language and how difficult it would be to string together a meaningful English sentence by randomly placing the letters one after another.
As an illustration, consider the difficulty of forming just one line of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters randomly onto a tabletop. Only one of 26 possible letters will work correctly at each of the 30 sites in the phrase. The probability of successfully assembling Shakespeare's classic line by pure chance is determined by computing 1 over 26 to the 30th power. The result is a staggering 1 chance in 2,810 trillion octillion. Yet while these odds are beyond comprehension, they seem almost reasonable when compared to the probability of randomly forming just one of the simplest protein molecules known to science. The smallest proteins in nature are comprised of about 100 amino acids. These chemical components must align in specific positions along a chain. Biologists have estimated that on a planet covered by a primordial soup, filled with complete sets of all 20 types of amino acids, the time necessary to construct a functional protein of 100 units would be roughly equivalent to the oldest estimated age of the universe, multiplied by 10 to the 60th power. But despite this inconceivable time frame, even if our protein somehow correctly self-assembled, the mystery of life's origin is still far from resolved.
Let's just say that against all odds, against everything we know about science, you do get one 100 amino acid long protein by chance. What do you have? Well, you have one protein. That's it. We don't have life because even the simplest cell requires over 600 proteins in order for it to be functional, in order for it to be alive. So mainstream scientists no longer think that life and the building blocks of life could originate by chance. They're now looking for a way to explain the building blocks and explain life's organization by some form of law or combination of laws that would allow that to happen. Chance is no longer an option.
Isn't that interesting that he says that? he says that there's just no way that this could happen in an undirected way. It's just not possible. And yet, our science textbooks today indicate that that's how you make the leap from Darwin's evolutionary theory, which basically says, here's how all of these species came about. Remember, that's the name of his book, On the Origin of Species. He doesn't really talk about the origin of life, but they make that leap by this particular experiment, which is still seen in books as late as 2000 and 2004. This is the Stanley Miller experiment that I remember growing up with, because I was born in 51. It happened in 1953. And in this experiment, what a guy did, a scientist did, is he put together some, what he thought recreated the beginning of the Earth's atmosphere, put a little bit of electrical charges in it, and what did he get? He got some amino acids. And so the leap was made from there that this is probably how life occurred. And for everyone who was toying with the idea of evolution, they went, well, of course, you see, life can just begin on its own. Of course, nothing was ever stated about how did you get the molecules there in the beginning, which we're going to be looking at in just a moment. But I want to say to you that the biggest problem with this particular experiment that's still in science books today, and they'll put the little caveat there now, Stanley Miller we have now figured out that the way that he created the conditions for the early Earth are incorrect. But we've done other experiments that have brought about amino acids with what we think is the correct atmosphere, etc. So all of those things are stated in the science textbook. To me, that's not the problem. Here's the problem. The problem is this. Once you get those amino acids that have been, and of course, somebody designed that. Somebody put that together and got those amino acids. But as soon as you do that, the major problem with this Miller experiment is not that they improperly recreated the Earth's atmospheric conditions, which they did. That's not it. It is the forming of the amino acids into a chain that needs to be done by the direction of DNA, which has RNA as a part of it that actually gives the instructions for those amino acids to line up properly. Otherwise, you've got a whole bunch of amino acids like you've got a whole bunch of Scrabble tiles, and you're throwing them all out there, and you're wanting them to happen. It doesn't happen unless you have the direction and the instruction. And the instruction is DNA. And so this is the thing. And that gets you one protein. That does not give you life. And remember, there are 600 proteins in the simplest cell that we know of. Now you understand why scientists are saying there's no way life is going to begin just by chance. There's got to be some law out there, some chemical attraction, some magnetic attraction that bring them all together. Well, then that brings us to this question now. The universe. How did it come about? Because you've got to get all those things there in the beginning to get life. So you've got these one of three choices. The universe and all that is in it is either self-eternal, it's just not self-eternal, it's just eternal. It's like God. It never had a beginning, it'll never have an end. It's self-originating, it just came about on its own, or it is created by design. Okay? And so, where does the evidence today lead us? Look on page 11. The Bible clearly teaches that the universe and all that is in it had a beginning. New scientific information over the last 40 and 50 years regarding the universe, especially since the advent of the Hubble telescope, is indicating and leading us to the very same conclusion, that this universe had a beginning. And that's why I made that joke when I was doing the promo for this class. You've got to understand that the Big Bang Theory is not just a very popular television show. Because there is this understanding now, because of the Hubble telescope, that we are expanding in our universe. Our universe continues to expand. And it does not. I don't have time to tell you why it does not, but but it does not oscillate. It doesn't expand and contract, expand and contract. It is not doing that. That is something that some scientists have said, which has been proven wrong. In other words, if you triangulate, okay, well, first of all, the immense size of the universe is absolutely necessary in relationship to gravitational forces. If you have it too close together, they will all just gravity bring it together, you'll get one big clump. But the second thing, if you triangulate 3 different galaxies in the universe right now, which we can do with our Hubble telescopes, they will form a larger triangle tomorrow. We know that to be the case. It is expanding outward, and at the end of the universe, they postulate that those things are moving so quickly that they're moving at the speed of light. All right, now, let me ask you a question. If that is the case, if the space between the galaxies is getting greater, if we go backward in time, this means that our universe would be smaller at a certain time. If you see this expansion going on, and it's always going on, if you go backwards, if the triangle is this big right now, you keep going back, it's smaller, it's smaller, it's smaller, it's smaller, it's smaller, until you get to what is called a point of gravitational singularity, a point in which everything existed in one, according to the scientists, one small point, which is smaller than a period on a page of writing. Everything in the universe, all of the energy needed to create it. And that's where you get the Big Bang Theory. Logically, that if we travel back to a point of singularity, and look at my illustration of point of singularity. Can anybody see the point in the first illustration? There is one there. Look at how small it is. I was so glad that came out. It actually translated out of the internet into my copy and into your copy here. Okay, so you got that point of singularity right there. Edwin Hubble arrived at this conclusion in 1950, and a BBC radio announcer mockingly coined the theory as the Big Bang. Scientists now embrace that particular coined term and say this is the Big Bang Theory. But it produces something like this, and I've taken this out of a book by John Clayton called The Source. Today, the Big Bang Theory says that between 14 and 22 billion years ago, a singularity, suddenly and without any known explanation, became visible and produced something like a gigantic, seemingly controlled explosion. That is an amazing thought right there. To me, I don't know how I can explain to you that all of this vast universe could be in something that is less than a period on a page. But it occurs to me that when God just said everything to begin, why couldn't it have begun just that way? And this universe continues on its expansion. Let me tell you, there are many more proofs that that is necessary. Right now, we are living next to a sun that's got half-life, folks. That is a sun that is a yellow sun. It is not a red sun, and it is not a blue sun. It is a yellow sun. And we absolutely need a yellow sun to have life as we know it upon this earth. And so this whole idea, the COBE that went out found that the temperature measurements in the universe are consistent with this controlled explosion that continues to expand. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Was it by a Big Bang? It appears that the science is leading us to that. I don't have time to go into hydrogen in our universe. I'm just going to make these 3 points real quickly here. I wanted to read it to you out of Clayton because it's pretty technical. But the only known fuel source of our sun and all other stars, and the starting process that drives all known energy in our universe in space, is hydrogen. Okay? Every second, our sun converts 661 million tons of hydrogen and fuses it into 657 million tons of helium. And at this rate, and you say, well, what's the other? Well, the other is the light and the radiation that goes out from it. Where do you get the loss of those millions of tons? It's the light and the radiation that goes out. that we absolutely need. At this rate, and the rate of other stars' conversion of hydrogen into helium, if the universe had always been in existence, we would be running low on the element of hydrogen. But turn the page. Don't turn the page. It is not the case. We do not run low on it if this universe is eternal. So once again, the reasons for this universe not being eternal and not being existing forever and ever in time are things that scientists are coming up on their own years. They're not people who believe in God. They are finding this to be the case. Universal laws, again, there are so many that would violate the idea of a universe that came about in any other way except for this point of singularity. The expanding universe, I believe, then demands a beginning. And that matter is either self-originated or eternal, violates existing known laws, and they are these right here. First one is the law of conservation of matter and energy, foundation for chemistry. Second one's the law of conservation for angular momentum, the foundation for the physical sciences. Third one, the law of conservation for electrical charges, the foundation for electronics that we have today, and those are only three of many. So if you say matter is eternal, you violate those known, universal, unintended laws. Okay? If you say that matter has always been here and that it's never gone anyplace, you have that problem right there. Genesis tells you that everything that we know about had a beginning, had a controlled beginning, had a virtuous beginning, had a beginning by an invisible God, had a beginning by an all-powerful God who could give us purpose, who could give us life, and who could give us service in this life. It is truly amazing. Just to end up, our unique planet, this didn't come out well, but I could have changed it at the last minute. Well under 1% of all galaxies in space have conditions necessary to sustain life. Well under 1%. Okay? Match that with, throughout most of the galaxy, the gravitational and magnetic forces are too immense for the solar system. If we're at the other end of the universe, we're screaming through life, and we would not be, our Earth would begin to fall apart and going at too great a speed. So we have to be in the exact right galaxy, in the exact placement in this universe. Next, 95% of all the stars are either too small or too cold to support a functional solar system where life can exist. Next, our distance from the sun is ideal. Next, the moon, I didn't put this in, the moon that we have is absolutely necessary. The tilt of the Earth is absolutely necessary for the atmospheric conditions upon this Earth, along with the moon, to have the right kind of temperature there. Next, the list goes on and on. And you have the list right there, put in I wish Court were here, to say, there's my statistics right there. So there's where you get the probability, being in the right kind of galaxy, 1 in 100. Being in the right place in the galaxy, 1 in 150, it goes on and on and on. Total odds of life coming about on this planet, on its own, naturalistic, undirected, are 1 in 150 with all of those zeros following it.
So there is a chance.
There is a chance, that's right, okay. And that's what this whole class has been about, this whole series has been about. Creation or evolution, which is more reasonable to believe. I am acting like I'm the prosecutor up here. You're the jury. What is more reasonable to believe on that? And I'll end with the fun fact of the day, and then we have 5 minutes for questions, comments, suggestions, etc. Here's the fun fact of the day. The odds of there being an accidental planet hospitable for life are 15 billion times less likely than surviving a free fall from an airplane at 8,000 feet without a